I'd like to also thank a few of our partners here. Of course, we have different collaborators. We have the Oil Region Alliance in this area, as well as the Venango Area Chamber of Commerce. They've done a stellar job of supporting us. But I think we couldn't do this all, for sure, without Drake Well Museum and Park, and particularly Friends of Drake Well Charity, which we've been happy to work with over time. They've helped in a way, give birth to this organization, and they continue to be with us here today. So I'm very, very appreciative of all of their efforts. They didn't have to go with this wild idea, but they did, and I think now we can see the result. So in focusing here on the Commonwealth, I just wanted to turn things over briefly here to Michael Knecht. He's the site administrator of Drake Well Museum and Park for a few words before we start. Come on up, Michael.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning. I'm not going to talk long. I've lost my voice in the last 24 hours, but on behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, the Drake Well Museum and Park, and the Friends of Drake Well, I want to welcome you to this wonderful facility. It's always a pleasure to have you all here. It's hard to believe that this is year number 4 that we have done this with Andrew. And it's a great opportunity for many of you, maybe for the first time, to see where the birthplace of the oil industry began in 1859. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are over here on my right. There's also restrooms back behind the multi-purpose room where you had breakfast. If there is an emergency, the door that you entered the museum today is an emergency exit. There's also an exit through the MPR and through the back of the exhibit gallery. I was looking at the schedule that Andrew has put together, and it is an amazing schedule, an amazing group of panelists coming to talk to you today, and looking forward to that. Also looking forward to hearing Mike Sommers in API. Without API, we would not be here. And so enjoy your time here, and if you have any questions, find me or one of the staff. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, a bit of a surprise. As you know, we're in the middle of a government shutdown, and in Washington we all know that, and we don't know when it's going to end. And we always, as a forum, ask both parties to provide, the whole way up the chain, not quite to the president, but pretty close, to provide or to send someone or to provide remarks, either live or recorded. We've done that time and time again. As our debate has evolved here, though, we've gotten away from pre-records. We made an exception today. We asked both senators from Pennsylvania, the senior Senator John Fetterman, as well as the junior Senator Dave McCormick, to provide remarks, lives or videos. We were successful in that the junior Senator, Dave McCormick, decided to give us a video, which I'm going to play for you now. Mark, take it away.
Hi, this is Senator Dave McCormick. Last year I spoke to you as a candidate about the vast energy resources that Pennsylvania is blessed with and how they can be utilized to create good paying jobs, drive economic growth, protect our environment, and make America an energy dominant nation. Today, I'm happy to report that while there's more work to be done, we're making progress. In July, I hosted the inaugural Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit, which brought together President Trump, members of his cabinet, top executives in energy and artificial intelligence, leading global investors, key representatives in labor, trade, and government officials to announce $92 billion of investment in data centers, energy and power infrastructure, and workforce and AI training projects. These commitments will create tens of thousands of construction jobs and thousands of permanent jobs, signaling Pennsylvania's readiness to power the AI and energy revolutions, and further strengthening America's resilience and independence. Pennsylvania is the second largest energy producer in the nation. We have the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world, elite research institutions, a large skilled workforce, and proximity to water and major population centers. But as I said at the summit, we are closer to the beginning than the end of this energy and AI revolution. I'm committed to working with the Trump administration and my colleagues on the Energy Committee to enact meaningful permitting reform and get these projects off the ground and completed in an efficient manner. Pennsylvania has the ability to lead the way in helping us win the AI race against China, unleash American energy dominance, and protect the environment. And all of you in Titusville today will play a key role in making that a reality. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. So we're kind of rapidly going through we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to get things going with the keynote. And so just to talk to you a little bit about API's relationship with this site, back in 1934 for the Diamond Jubilee, as it was known, 75th anniversary of oil, API worked with the local chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution and other individuals here who had an existing museum to make this modern site, purchasing this property, building the dike outside, and an earlier version of the museum, which is in back of me, and then handed it over to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Historical Museum Commission. And then, of course, more things here were built over time. That then went on, and it developed here until 1963 when the modern museum was built. And then in 2009, I believe, was it 2009? Yes. The front glass here was added that brings the replica into this room. As far as I know, this room has never been used in this way for such a meeting, and we're hoping going forward, I mean, there should be committee meetings here by state and federal officials, in my opinion, but not only. We could have everything here. We could either debate oil and energy to having a celebration of those getting married or whatever it takes. Work with the folks at Drakewell, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy it. The last time that we had API up here in force, before Mike's visit, of course, we had Stephanie Wisman last year, who was up here. I'm sure many of you got a chance to meet her. But I think the full delegation was here in 1959 for the 100th anniversary of oil. And you will find that image over outside here, the Energy for America poster, which is every year. It's on your bags, your conference bags. It's printed out here. The Friends of Drakewell will be selling that at a little bit later here to their benefit. We provide it to them, and it allows them to generate a little bit of extra revenue. Please visit the gift shop outside. You will not regret it, especially if you're an energy geek like myself, and I'm sure many of you are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mike Sommers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Since his appointment in July 2018 as the 15th president, right, of API, he has overseen the strategic realignment of API's priorities and advocacy efforts. Among other initiatives, he led the organization through an unprecedented period in global energy markets, effectively positioning the industry through political transitions in Washington and in state capitals across the country, increased utilization and visibility of API standards and safety programs, and led the adoption of the industry's solutions-oriented effort to address the risks of climate change. Of course, he also spent a long time on Capitol Hill. You can read about his bio online, as well as a stint in the White House. And having done that myself, he seems to come out of it better, not worse. And it's very, very hard work. We're very, very happy that he's here with us today. And I'm very, very excited about his speech today, which is entitled From the First Well to the Next Chapter, Building America's Energy Future. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Mike Sommers. Yes, you're welcome. Come on up.
Thank you, Andrew. What an honor to be here. As a student of history, I can't believe it took me 8 years as the CEO of API to get to this historic site. Andrew asked me to be here last year, and I wasn't able to get here, but I wanted to make sure that I got here this year, and I can assure you that this is not my last trip to Titusville. I don't know what happened between 1959 and 2025, but I can assure you that this relationship with API and Titusville and the historic Drake Well is not going to end today, and we're excited about the opportunity. So excited to continue the ability to partner with this historic site. So a couple of things at the top here. For those of you who haven't walked through the museum, I would really encourage you to do it during one of the breaks today. It is not what I expected. This is a fully modern museum. I'm sure it is great for school kids to walk through this museum and have the opportunity to really learn the history of the American oil and gas industry. As the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, we've been part of that history for decades and decades. Started really in 1919 as an organization that needed to build standards for an oil industry that didn't have them at the time. This is our primary focus as an organization is as a standards association that started as a couple of standards for the pipeline community and has grown into 800 standards that the American Petroleum Institute maintains worldwide. We have offices in Beijing and Dubai and Rio that sell those standards and certifications into the international marketplace. So we're fully an international organization. As the industry has grown, the American Petroleum Institute has grown. But before I get to the true theme of my speech, I wanted to give you a little bit more history. One of the local natives here, of course, is Ida Tarbell. You can learn all about Ida in the museum behind me. Of course, Ida was the one who wrote the seminal book on the Standard Oil Company and led to its ultimate breakup. In 1904, it was Ida Tarbell's work that led to the breakup of the Standard Oil Company. What you may not know about Ida is that she wasn't just a famous muckraker, as Teddy Roosevelt called her, but she also was a historian. She wrote a lot of different biographies, including one of Abraham Lincoln in 1924. So in 1924, she wrote a book called In Lincoln's Footsteps, where she traced the path of Abraham Lincoln from his boyhood in Kentucky and Indiana, and then 25 years in the state of Illinois. I happened to grow up in the state of Illinois, and I remember as a kid, there were signs all over central Illinois for what was called the Lincoln Heritage Trail. And this was a trail that actually traced Ida Tarbell's steps when she wrote that biography. So the history between my youth and someone who grew up in a state, the land of Lincoln, where we didn't get President's Day off, we got Lincoln's birthday off. And our 8th grade trip wasn't to Washington, D.C., it was to Springfield, Illinois. When I was a kid in 5th grade, I memorized the Gettysburg Address. That was an assignment at my local parochial elementary school. So Lincoln was inculcated in my life, my entire youth. And that Lincoln Heritage Trail, I remember, going to Springfield and following the steps of Lincoln. So I recently picked up a book that someone recommended to me. It's called The Land of Lincoln by an author by the name of Andrew Ferguson, written in the early 2000s. And I'd encourage you to pick it up. Similar to me, he grew up in the state of Illinois and was inculcated with this Lincoln legacy. But I come to the 5th chapter where it starts talking about that Lincoln Heritage Trail, and this is what I learned. Andrew Ferguson went and met with the old state historian in the state of Illinois, and he asked him, where did the Lincoln Heritage Trail come from? And he said, well, I didn't come up with it. In the early 1960s, the marketing guys from the American Petroleum Institute showed up. And they said, we want to create this trail because if we promote more tourism, we're going to have more people buying gasoline. So it wasn't just the Drake well that API came in and helped preserve, but it was also Lincoln's legacy. So here we are today at the historic Drake well, the incredible history that we have here with API participating in the restoration of this project in 1934 and the early 1960s, API retracing Lincoln's steps to here we are today in a time of historic international change, where we're dealing with historic energy transitions. And today, we're celebrating what it's going to take for the United States to go from the true energy superpower that we are to taking it to the next level of energy leadership. We know the position that we are in today, where we have rising energy demand. In fact, in the United States, we expect energy demand to go up by 40% just in the next 15 years. And the real question that I think policymakers, and we have some of them here today, are going to have to answer is, where is that energy going to come from? Because we know that demand is going to go up. And by the way, we knew it was going to go up even before the dawn of artificial intelligence and more data centers. We knew that. Policymakers knew that. Why? Because more people are going into the middle class. They're using more air conditioning. And yeah, they're plugging more things into the grid. And that means we're going to need more energy sources going forward. But primarily, we're going to need a lot more natural gas. And that's where Pennsylvania comes in. This was the state that led the energy revolution from the beginning. This was the place that started the oil revolution in 1859. And then that revolution has continued. You've led the way for decades and decades to build energy sources of the future. This was the state that pioneered the fracking revolution. This was the state that was at the forefront of the coal revolution, the nuclear revolution. And I know that that history is going to continue today. As Senator McCormick said, we have the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world right here under our feet. And natural gas is going to play such a key role going forward. I was honored earlier this year to be back in the Commonwealth, where I had the opportunity to speak to Senator McCormick's AI and Energy Summit that he held at Carnegie Mellon University, where he brought together hyperscalers and energy producers and people that are going to require that energy going forward. And the whole conversation was, where is that energy going to come from? So that's what this energy revolution is all about, and why Pennsylvania is going to play a key role going forward. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. Think about that for a minute. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And we've talked a lot about energy transitions, but we actually had an experiment in this just a few short years ago during the pandemic. So think about the position that we were in then, where everyone was staying home from school. No one was going to work in the Western world. Guess what the number was then? The world still consumed 90 million barrels of oil every single day. This energy transition is not going to be easy. And we know that oil and natural gas are going to play a key role for decades and decades to come. And what's great about where we stand today is the last big energy revolution started right here, 100 feet from us, right behind you, that historic Drake well, when an entrepreneur decided to take a risk. When everyone else doubted Colonel Drake persisted. And discovering oil on this historic site, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania became the world's energy leader. And you're poised to do it again. But what is going to be required to keep that energy revolution going forward? It started here, but how do we keep it going? That is the question that policymakers have to take today. And I think the answer is pretty simple. We have the resources in this country. We have them right here under our feet. But what is holding us back? What's holding us back is a government, both at the state and federal level, that is preventing us from getting these resources, extracting these resources. We have the most broken permitting process at the federal and state level that you can possibly imagine. Right now, it takes over a decade for many of these energy projects to actually take hold. We don't have a decade to wait. We know that this AI revolution is going on. We know that the world is going to require more energy. And again, that all comes back to that key question: where is it going to come from? And if we can't extract these resources, we are going to cede our place as the #1 energy producer in the world. So, my call today is that Republicans and Democrats come together and have this conversation about where we're going to get this energy and how we reform a permitting structure that is so broken. We've seen it time and time again. Pipelines canceled as a consequence of them no longer being economic because we can't get them built in a timely manner. It happens over and over and over again. Let me give you a key example. Just last year, it took an act of Congress to build a pipeline in this country. The Mountain Valley Pipeline had been held up for years and years and years. It was a pipeline that was supposed to cost $3 billion. At completion, it ended up costing $9 billion because it got held up by a federal permitting process and then activist litigants in state and federal courts. There is a historical example, however, of that happening before. The same thing happened in the late 1970s. In the state of Alaska. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline was being held up for environmental reasons. And it took an act of Congress to get that pipeline built. In the intervening time, that federal permitting process has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And if it weren't for Senator Joe Manchin, in the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there still wouldn't be that Mountain Valley Pipeline, which ships natural gas from the state of Pennsylvania through West Virginia to output into the Gulf Coast. That pipeline still wouldn't be built if it weren't for that act of Congress. It shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. That pipeline right now is fully subscribed. We need another pipeline because the natural gas resources in this state are growing so much. But we're tapped out right now because there's no takeaway capacity left for the state of Pennsylvania. So this is becoming a jobs issue, it's becoming an economic issue, it's becoming a consumer issue. And I believe that ultimately it is about to become a political imperative because energy prices are going up. We're in this fascinating place right now where gasoline prices have been going down, but energy prices are going up 10, 20%, and they're only going to go up more if we can't build pipelines and transmission lines in this country again. And by the way, this isn't just something that the oil and gas industry needs. We know that other sources of energy need it too. And if we're going to power the future that we know that we need in this country and win the energy revolution, permitting reform is required. Andrew mentioned that we're currently in this terrible government shutdown. The political parties are at the farthest point away that they have almost ever been. But this is one area where I think our country can actually come together and get something done because it is a political imperative. Because in that, what we call the energy trilemma of how do you provide energy that is affordable, reliable, and sustainable, it's affordability that almost always wins. And when American consumers stand up and see that their energy prices are going up 20% and their politicians aren't doing anything about it, they will vote and they will make this a political imperative to get this done. API recently launched a campaign. We call it the America Builds, America Wins campaign to provide the political space for lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to come together. And there are glimmers of hope. The United States Congress right now is working on a bill called the SPEED Act that is a bipartisan bill between Republicans and Democrats to fix this process. But that's not the only thing that has to be done. You talk to API member companies, our big companies that want to build these big energy projects. And what they tell me is that, yeah, the federal permitting process and the state permitting process takes too long. But we can get through it. What has to be solved is the endless litigation that occurs and the venue shopping that occurs. So even after you get a federal permit, it's almost impossible to get anything built in a timely and economic fashion. We can't wait. And it is time for Republicans and Democrats to come together to get this done. The energy revolution started right here in beautiful Titusville, Pennsylvania. And what you see here, the historic sites, of course, you can still smell the oil in the Drake well. It's still coming up, by the way. And I would encourage you to walk 100 feet away and see that incredible site. That energy revolution started right here. But it doesn't have to end here. The United States can continue to be the largest oil, gas, and by the way, renewable energy producer in the world and win the race for the future, because everything starts with energy. And we know that if America builds, America wins. With that, proud to be here in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Hello? Oh. Does anyone have any questions? Sid, why am I not surprised?
First of all, thank you very much. I agree wholeheartedly with you and my support. It seems there's a bit of a conundrum now, if you will, in the sense that we would like to see a low price for gasoline and diesel and natural gas for electricity and home heating, cooking. So consumers want a low price, but the industry needs a price adequate to give them margins to support development and to keep finding 100 million barrels a day of new oil year after year, and to do research and to pay for environmental things that we all want to see kept up. So how does one handle that conundrum? And certainly the president's faced with that right now, and I'm sure you're faced with that too. So what do you say about this conundrum on price?
Absolutely, and great question. This is what I'll say, first of all. This is an industry that, as you can tell from the museum behind me, we're very used to the booms and busts of the commodity cycle. Prices go up, prices go down. Our member companies at API, we invest over the long term to ensure that the American people have an appropriate price for what they pay every single day at the pump or for their energy. And I'll say that I went through a pretty historic bust during the COVID pandemic when oil prices actually went negative for a short while at negative $39 a barrel. We all should have bought then, by the way. So that was a period, of course, a historic period, and as the museum gets updated, I'm sure that will be highlighted as well. But that was a period where the industry was not very well capitalized. And there had been a lot of capital that flowed into, we were not returning money to investors as the industry should have. And the industry, just like nobody else was prepared for a global pandemic, the industry wasn't prepared for a global pandemic. Now this industry is very well capitalized. And is ready for what looks like another downturn in prices, mainly as a consequence of OPEC producing more barrels and putting them in the market. So the industry is resilient. The industry will continue to produce. What's amazing is we are now producing more oil in this country, more natural gas in this country than any country has in the history of humanity. But the real question is, are we going to be able to continue to explore and find new resources? Because if you listen to the scholars on this, the Permian Basin, which is the #1 producer in the United States right now, this is the area in Texas and New Mexico. If you listen to the scholars, they think that production is peaking or will peak in the Permian Basin sometime in the late 2020s. For what it's worth, I don't believe that. But that's what many of the scholars suggest. But if that is true, we need to be looking for other places to find these resources in the United States. So that's why increased leasing in the Gulf of America is very important, which President Trump has put back online. So there's a boom in the amount of exploration in the Gulf of America right now, and we expect that there are going to be 30 lease sales just in the next 10 years to produce more oil and natural gas from the Gulf of America. You're seeing people return to Alaska. That Trans-Alaska pipeline that I mentioned earlier is not operating at full capacity. We could be developing more in the state of Alaska and in many, many other places. But we have to be able to have access to these resources. So Gulf of America, more lease sales on federal lands, returning to Alaska, more development in the Gulf of America. That is what's going to provide the resources that we're going to require if we're going to continue to be the world energy superpower.
Great. Brenda.
Hi, good morning. Brenda Schaefer from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. So several times during your presentation, you mentioned the phrase energy transition. But actually, there's zero evidence that we're replacing fossil fuels with today's generation of renewable energy. And in fact, if you look at the latest report of the Energy Institute, one of the most reliable sources of energy data, they estimate today that fossil fuels supply 87% of global energy consumption, meaning from their estimate in 2023 was 81.6, so meaning an incredible increase due to their more sort of reliable assessments about the role of fossil fuels. Is there any reason we should continue sort of, in a sense, misleading our public about this idea that we're on the eve of a transition to today's generation of renewable energies, and also misleading investors about these trends?
Brenda, I completely agree. I think actually we are transitioning from the energy transition. Let's put this into perspective. That the last time a so-called energy transition occurred was the 1960s, when we started using more oil and gas than we did coal. So we were transitioning from coal to oil and natural gas about in the 1960s time period. In 2024, the world consumed more coal than it has in the history of humanity. In 2025, that number will be exceeded. We'll use more coal in the history of humanity than we have in all time. So energy transitions are very rarely energy transitions. What happens is the pie gets bigger. More people are consuming more energy. But we are going to need more energy to provide to the world. And that means we're going to have a lot more oil and natural gas, of course. We expect that by 2040, we're going to require more than 110 million barrels of oil every single day. We're going to need a heck of a lot more natural gas because that's how most people are powering their homes right now. But in addition, we are going to need new energy sources as well. Although, I would argue that wind and solar are some of the oldest kinds of energy. The first solar cell was actually invented in the 1890s. Wind, of course, has been around for decades and decades. We had an energy transition, and it was from those sources of energy to oil and gas. But we're going to need a lot more energy on the grid, where that pie is only growing. And so, yeah, we're going to need oil, we're going to need natural gas, we're going to continue to need a lot of coal, but we're going to need wind and solar and geothermal, which we have out right in front of us. But also, we're going to need a lot more nuclear. And so advanced nuclear technology is going to be very important for our future as well.
Tatiana?
Thank you. I'm Tatiana Anderson. I've worked with Andrew in the Drake Forum for a few years now. Thank you for your comments. You talked about this issue being a bipartisan one. We have some pretty heavy hitters in this room from the world of research and development, think tanks, politicians themselves. What would you say to all of us in this room about what we can do personally to address the bipartisan issue, to bring people together, to really, I guess, do everything you're saying about creating an energy revolution that's actually moving forward?
So this is a great question. I do think that politicians, lawmakers, I spent 20 years in government service, they are moved when their constituents tell them to move, and not until then. We have a state senator, we have a representative here as well who represent this area, Lee and Scott. So pleased that they're here with us today. They can speak to this, that when their constituents call, when their constituents write, they move. And I'm telling you, we're at this cusp, that as prices continue to rise because of more demand on the grid, this is going to be a political imperative for lawmakers. It's not going to be enough to say that, we don't want to do that because it's fossil fuels, or we don't want to do that because it's wind and solar on the other side. We have to get back to a point where, I'll remind you that the fracking revolution occurred when Barack Obama was president of the United States. That this was at one point a bipartisan issue, more energy on the grid, and that's one of the ads that we're playing in Washington, D.C. right now, traces the history from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan to George Bush to Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton in between, to now, where every politician talked about energy security and energy independence. This has historically been a bipartisan issue. So I'm hopeful that as it's everyone in this audience that has it in their power to do this, call your congressman, get involved. Go to API's website that is called permittingreformnow.org and join this revolution where we're actually going to be able to convince people that this is a political imperative to get it done. Because it doesn't just mean the country's economic future, but it means consumers' ability to continue to pay for these resources.
Hi, Michael Ratner with Congressional Research Service. My question kind of gets at what you're talking about, but from a little different perspective, in that how do you, or what are the effects on your job, API's job, but everything that you've been saying, when the pendulum of politics swings so widely from currently to Trump, if you're going backwards to Biden, to Trump, to Obama, how do companies, how does API reconcile those big swings in politics?
Michael, that's a great question, and let me do a call out for the Congressional Research Service. I mentioned I worked on Capitol Hill for decades, and the Congressional Research Service is such a resource for Congress in providing nonpartisan information. It's a national treasure. So, Michael, thank you for what you do. Darren Woods, right after the election, Darren is the CEO of ExxonMobil, made the point that this industry does not invest over 4-year cycles. We invest over the long term. So part of my job at API is to pendulum-proof the American oil and gas industry, no matter who the President of the United States is. So we work with both political parties. I had the opportunity to meet, almost on an annual basis with John Podesta, who spoke to this forum just last year. John Podesta was a voice of reason within the Biden administration. We have great working relationships, across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats who care about these issues. And the most important word in the American Petroleum Institute is institute. We are meant to be a research body, a provider of data to lawmakers and to others who seek to learn more about this incredible, energy industry. So it is a challenge because you're right. The pendulum does seem to be swinging wider and wider, and my challenge as the CEO of API is to not get hit by that pendulum every 4 years. I will say that the extreme swing from Biden to Trump has been something to behold. I mean, if you think about what we were going through with President Biden, where they were canceling lease sales in the Gulf of America, they were holding up leases on federal lands. They put in place the LNG pause for exporting liquefied natural gas. I don't think, because I think even Democratic politicians now confirm that they swung way too far towards that so-called energy transition. And now you even see people like the governor of California, Governor Newsom, who just signed into law a bill that will allow for more leases in Kern County, California, which is one of the most prolific oil fields in the world, that we're going to have more drilling in the state of California because he recognizes that they've gone too far. So I think what you're probably seeing right now is that swing in the opposite direction, where President Trump is canceling wind projects and solar projects all over the country. I actually think now that we've seen these two extremes, that there is room in the middle for us to develop this bipartisan approach to energy because of energy demand going up and prices going up, and everyone recognizes that we have to get back to an all-of-the-above energy policy.
I have a follow-up. Thank you so much. I wanted to speak a little bit about kind of the regulatory certainty piece in the middle of those pendulum swings. I hear what you're saying about, you know, projects moving forward, and then I understand kind of on a long-term basis, right? Like that's super important to have that clarity, right? So you can, as you're saying, you know, build that infrastructure ahead of time, ahead of when you need it. But I wonder if you can kind of speak to I hear a lot from operators and industry about how difficult it is to make decisions in the interim, like on the regulatory side, with all the uncertainty around, you know, as you say, the pendulum swing, what we're seeing from the administration on rollbacks and akin to the kind of cancellations that you're talking about of projects that, you know, we need more energy, right? We need more transmission. So I guess in that space, like, do you see room for preserving the kind of consensus-based regulatory changes over the last, you know, 10, 15 years that have, in large part, I think, been adopted? I work on methane, and, you know, for that, you know, many operators are investing billions of dollars to capture methane, bring it to market, and seeing environmental improvement. So I guess, do you have any comments on, like, at this moment in time, like, what your view about regulatory certainty is?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Elizabeth, you raise a great point, which is what has been truly historic about the last few decades is that energy production in the United States has gone up, but emissions have gone down. That's never happened before, and it is because of innovation and industry focus on cutting those emissions and environmental performance. API, for example, has a program called the Environmental Partnership, which is all about how you reduce methane emissions within our own operations. Not because of a government mandate, but because we recognize that there's a problem in methane emissions and we have to address that problem. Regulatory certainty is a huge issue for us. I'll give you an example. So the Environmental Protection Agency just announced that they were going to get rid of the greenhouse gas reporting program, the so-called GHGRP. The Environmental Protection Agency does not currently have statutory authority to execute a GHGRP. And what they have done is they've drawn a firm line in the sand that EPA now, under the Trump administration, is saying that if we don't have statutory authority to do something, we're not going to do it. So my industry, the American oil and gas industry, wants to continue to report on emissions. We've been doing this for 15 years. We want to continue to be able to do it. But it looks like the GHGRP is going to go away. So right now, we're in a process of figuring out how are we going to replace our ability to report on emissions. So API is going to play a key role in that. You know, we're already downloading all of that historical data, that is publicly available data, so that we can continue to report and compare it to historical data as well. We want to be able to continue to report and show the progress of the American oil and gas industry in reducing emissions over time. We also support the full federal regulation of methane. And at this point, anyway, in our negotiations with EPA, they plan to continue that program. We've suggested some tweaks on how they do it to allow for us to use more modern technology to report these methane emissions, but we want to continue to have that regulatory framework so that we're not dealing with 50 different states regulating methane emissions. So regulatory certainty is very important, and I'll tell you that if given a choice between a more stringent regulation that we have to deal with and giving us regulatory certainty over a 10-year, 20-year time horizon, we would take that more stringent regulatory system. And that is what we have advocated for. We want to continue to report. We know how important emissions reduction is for our social license to operate, but also for environmental performance. So no matter the administration, we're going to continue this work of the environmental partnership to reduce emissions within our own operations, not just at the wellhead, but in the transportation and also the refining of these important hydrocarbons. So we will do it if the federal government isn't going to do it, because it is that important for our license to operate going forward.
So we are behind schedule as usual here at the Drake Forum. Mike, your words were, I think, really captured the moment, particularly the need for bipartisan approach to the energy problems in front of us and the environment and so on. I've written hundreds of emails to people to get them to come up here in the woods and to be with us. And in the end, it's interesting the connections that actually get people up here. It wasn't an email to Mike that got him up here. Actually, my good friend, a classmate here from Oil City, Kayvon McNoon, and his family are friends with Mike and his family. And
our daughters were sorority sisters.
Yes, and Kayvon was my fraternity brother. And that's how small the world really is. And it's those personal connections that are very, very important, right? And I would say that to all the young people out here, that there are a couple of things that are very important in life. One is your personality, and the other one is the personality of your boss. And I think you know a little bit about that, Mike. So to make this appropriately personal, I have something for you to go back to Washington with that you're not going to be able to fit in your carry-on, but we'll get it back to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I earlier this year, a local collector approached me about this. I was able to get this on the open market, and it's fully listed down below here, so nobody can ever forget it, whoever sees it. But this is a banner from the 1934 opening of Drake Well Museum here, which was shepherded by API. It was professionally framed by Victorian City Art and Frame in Franklin. And it reads that it's this banner that API spearheaded that effort to commemorate the birth of the modern energy industry in Pennsylvania on August 27th, 1859, presented with great appreciation to API President and CEO Mike Sommers, October 2025. I'm so glad you started out this talk about how happy you are to be up here, how impressive the museum is. We don't want this to be your last visit. We'd love to have you up anytime you want to come up. But we're hoping that you can accept this small appreciation of our history to hang on your walls in Washington, D.C.
I can assure you this is going to have a prominent place in the API Washington office, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We'll make sure we get it to you.
FedEx can transport.
Exactly, yeah. Mike said maybe we could get FedEx to take it. Actually, it's going to be my car, but that's okay. You know, it burns gasoline for now. You know, who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, Andrew X, exactly. So I think with that, just one second. Yes, so now we're going to I know Mike has to take off and get back to the Pittsburgh airport, but what I'd like to do is move on to the next session, which we call the Energy Scene Setter, and we invite someone every year to come and deliver a little bit about where the world of energy is, statistically and otherwise, and where it might be going. And we're very, very happy this year to have Adam Sieminski with us. He's been here before, back in 2009, so not 1859, but 2009, right? And Adam is here with his entire body from his company, his organization. He's currently senior advisor to the board of KAPSARC, an energy-focused advisory think tank based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he previously served as president from 2018 to 2021. And the president of KAPSARC, Fahad Al-Ajlan, is here with us today, as well as his colleague Brian. Before that, he held the James Schlesinger Chair for Energy and Geopolitics at the Center for Strategic International Studies, where he was a non-resident expert. From 2012 to 2017, he was the administrator of the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, and prior to that, he served as Senior Director for Energy and Environment on the U.S. National Security Council. He's very, very deeply involved in the energy world. You can find lots about him online. I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to let Adam take the floor and give us his take on where energy is and where it might be going. Thank you very much. Come on up, Adam.
Okay, then I don't need this. Thank you, Andrew, for the very kind introduction, and to Mike Sommers, that's a tough act to follow. So KAPSARC, as I said, is a think tank and advisory group in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I was thinking about the history of the Drake well. Fahad and I were reading a panel at the transit building last night that said the daily production of the Drake well was a gallon per hour. So that's about 1 barrel every 2 days. And Fahad had a little difficult time understanding that because the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia produces almost 4 million barrels a day. A little difference, and I think it shows you how the oil industry has changed over time. So, are there slides that you can bring up? So just click. Okay, so which one is it? I'm going for, there we go. All right. First, I thought I would give you, so which way do I have to point it? The forward button, the forward arrow, right? There we go. All right, so let's go back. A lot of people have 30 or 40 years of experience. I only have 10 years of experience, and if this clicker would work, 7 times. All right, so what are the 7 times of 10 years experience that I have? Mike talked about this earlier. So there's just a little bit of a delay. I grew up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is about a 3-hour drive east of here. And I got my driver's license in 1963. The first gallon of gasoline that I bought cost 30 cents. So that's a lot different. But you know, if you adjust for inflation between 1960s and now, it's about $3 a gallon, which is what we're currently paying. That's kind of a remarkable thing, too, when you think about it, that the price of gasoline hasn't really changed all that much. This was the period of disruptions. The embargo in 1973-74, the Iran-Iraq war in 1979-80, and oil in real terms got up to over $100 a barrel. Compared to today's prices. Then we had the diversification. So people started using lots of other fuels other than oil. And demand for oil began to go down. And during the 1980s, particularly after 1986, we had a real drop in the price of oil. That led us into what I call the period of the internet. 1990s. Oil wasn't doing much of anything. Energy was kind of static. And everybody was focused on the beginnings of the internet. Then in 2000s, we had a remarkable resurgence of growth in oil demand all around the world, particularly in China, where demand was growing by more than 1 million barrels a day in just one country, you know, over the period 2004 to 2008. We then had the shale revolution that dominated the period from 2010 to 2020. We have the transition that we could say might have started in the 2020s. We'll see where we're going. You know, it's kind of interesting. We're back to about $60 a barrel. Okay, so. And those are my 10 years worth of experiences 7 times, by the way. So why does it do this? You know, I sometimes have a prop, but supply, if you look in an economics textbook, it'll give you supply and demand curves, and this is the price, and this is the quantity, and they talk about widgets, and widgets are always very elastic. A small change in price or quantity gives you, you know, small changes. So quantity can shift around, and you just get small changes in prices is the way to think about it. For oil, the curves are a lot steeper. They look, instead of being flat like this, the curves are very steep. And what that says is for a small change in quantity, you know, 1 million barrels a day change in demand or supply can make a huge difference in the price. And that's what has always led to the issues associated with gasoline that motivate the politicians to want to look at changes in legislation and regulation. So here's some supply chain interruptions that I just listed over the course of my career. I mentioned 73 and 74, oversupply in 1986, China demand growth, global recession in 2009, Hurricane Sandy in 2012. There was no gasoline available in New York and New Jersey, and there was a huge effort on the part of the governments to change that. Shale revolution in North Dakota and Texas, the Marcellus in Pennsylvania for natural gas. Everybody remembers COVID and the huge drop in demand. We had almost, I don't know, it was like a 10 million barrel a day drop in demand. And then the supply chain interruptions in the Ukraine in 2022, Russian oil. This one is interesting. The attack on Abcake and the elimination of 5-6 million barrels a day of crude from the market. You know how much oil changed? I don't know, maybe $1 a barrel. There were headlines that said oil was going to go to $200 a barrel, and it didn't. We'll come back to what the reasons were for that. In fact, let's talk about it right now. This is a paper that was done at KAPSARC, peer-reviewed, published in the Energy Journal. And what that peer-reviewed paper says is that the market management of OPEC has shaved the peaks and the valleys off of these wild variations that we get in the price of oil. So that OPEC's market management has actually had a positive effect on GDP, because economists will tell you that excess volatility is not good for the markets, that there are economic losses associated with excess volatility. And what OPEC has managed to do over a good portion of the period that we looked at KAPSARC back to 2001. So by shifting prices to be less volatile, OPEC has actually helped the global economy. Let me pause for just a second and say I'm citing KAPSARC research here, and I lived in Saudi Arabia for 5 years, but I'm speaking not on behalf of KAPSARC or Saudi Arabia. These are my opinions, but I strongly believe that OPEC gets a bad rap on market management techniques. And in fact, I think as we move out over the next year or so, that we're going to see OPEC continuing to play a positive role in doing that. So Mike talked about this. Let me just show you some data. This is from a while ago, but it's still true. Growth in places like India probably are going to begin to supplant the growth that we've seen over the past 20 years in China. Eurasia. So the world is going to need more energy and more oil. The OECD countries might not need as much energy per unit of GDP growth, but the overall trend globally is that economic growth needs energy to fuel it, and oil is part of that. So looking at this data, what this says is that oil demand relative to GDP still has a very strong relationship, and that any growth of GDP above roughly 2% is in GDP global is going to lead to growth in demand for petroleum. So even if global GDP slows down in 2025 and 2026 relative to 2024, and that's kind of what the IMF and the World Bank and many other forecasters are suggesting, as long as it doesn't fall below 2%, we're still going to see growth in oil. So the forecasts are kind of changing from growth in the low 3% range to maybe 2.9% growth. So 0.2 or 0.3 percentage points drop is what people are saying going into next year, and that is still going to require more demand for petroleum than a lot of the doomsayers are suggesting. So that graph there probably is something that would look pretty good today, but let me tell you that that was from 2017, 2018. Up at the top, it says one of the largest forecasts for oil demand growth came from the International Energy Agency in Paris when they were still using a current policies case. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, the IEA is going to publish its 2025 global energy outlook, and they will have in it a current policies case for the first time in 5 years. It's probably going to show demand for oil in 2050 in the neighborhood of 110 to 114 million barrels a day. This chart comes from IHS Market, Dan Yergin's group, former CIRA. Basically what it is a supply curve for crude oil. And what it suggests is that at an increase in demand for petroleum of somewhere between 18 to 24 million barrels a day, and that's how much you would need to replace decline plus the additional growth that is required to get you to 2050, that oil prices are probably going to be in the range of about $75 a barrel in today's dollars. So oil currently trading roughly $60 to $65 a barrel. Actually, it's going to slow down investment in shale in the U.S., and that spare capacity that exists in OPEC is going to be a valuable thing to have again. Final slide. What could change the consensus outlook? This is like that big long paragraph that you always see, either at the beginning or the end of a lot of presentations. It says, these are forecasts. They're subject to change. Economic developments, population growth trends, innovations in things like transportation, efficiency. That reminds me too about the difference between efficiency and conservation. Lee Raymond, when he was the head of ExxonMobil some time ago, was speaking at a meeting that I was at, and I got to sit to him next to dinner. I said, Lee, you keep talking about efficiency. I hear other people talking about conservation. And I said, how do you see the difference between those two concepts? And Lee, in his kind of gravelly voice, said, efficiency is what we do that makes sense. And he said, conservation is what the government tells us to do. I've heard that quite a bit here in Pennsylvania in the last couple of days. You know, electric vehicles, I think we're still going to see electric vehicles. You know, all we need is a breakthrough in battery technology, and we're going to see that. That doesn't mean that petroleum is going to go away, because there are going to be a lot of people in the world that are still going to want gasoline, powered cars, and diesel vehicles. Utility grids need a lot of help. Again, you've heard plenty about that. I think that we're still going to see a lot of emphasis on trying to control emissions, including carbon dioxide. And that's why in Saudi Arabia, for example, they're talking about something called the circular carbon economy, which says that you can reduce, reuse, and recycle different emissions, including carbon dioxide. But to complete that picture, what you really need to think about is removal, and removal could be biological removal, things like trees, mangroves, ocean, algae, and other things, but also technical solutions like direct air capture, carbon storage, and others. And I think that it's going to be important that industry stays in that slot that says progress is going to have to take place. Even as we use more oil and natural gas, we are going to have to find ways to reduce the emissions associated with the combustion of those fuels. So this list I've been keeping for some time. The only thing that I've added to this in the last 10 years of my experience is artificial intelligence. So I didn't have that on this list 8 years ago. It might have made it 2 years ago. It's definitely on the list now. The use of artificial intelligence, I think, could, not only is it going to be energy intensive because of the electricity requirements, but I think that it is going to make a big difference in terms of things like finding solutions to carbon direct air capture with using artificial intelligence to explore different catalysts and other kinds of fuels. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to give back a little bit of the time that we lost with the later start.
That's okay. Is this on? Great. Does anybody have any questions for Adam? You're going to get a lot of chance to do a lot of FaceTime with him today. So, and he's been here many times. So you'll probably find him back meandering through the museum, looking at different things and contemplating the future. But anybody? Any questions? You all want a break? I guess so. Okay. Anyways, please give Adam a round of applause. Thank you, Adam. Much appreciated. Okay. So that was a very, very busy morning. What we're going to do is we're going to take a 15-minute break now. Be back here at around 10:15. We are then at some point going to invert the seats, and everything is going to be with that in the background. We had to roll the dice this morning concerning the weather, and I think now we're going to be able to save your corneas. So see you back here in 15 minutes. You find food and coffee still off to the left, my left.